Today, we're diving into a concept that could completely flip how you think about your work, your time, and honestly, even your happiness.
So let's just get right into it. Have you ever had one of those weeks where you are just so busy? You're running around, putting out fires, answering a million emails, but then Friday rolls around and you kind of look back and think, what did I actually do? It's such a common feeling, that weird gap between being busy and being productive.
And the reason we feel that way, the real root of that frustration, is this trap we all fall into. We just assume that every single thing on our to-do list is equally important, right? That if you just work harder, for longer, you'll get more done. But what if that's just not true? What if that whole idea is fundamentally flawed?
Well, that's where this really powerful, kind of counterintuitive idea comes in. It's a principle that shows us that the universe, well, it's not balanced at all. In fact, it's predictably, and I'd say wonderfully, unbalanced.
It's called the 80-20 principle, or sometimes the Pareto Principle. It's named after this Italian economist, Vilfredo Pareto. And the story of how he discovered it is actually pretty cool. He was just hanging out in his garden and noticed something weird. About 20% of his pea pods were making 80% of all the peas. So, being a curious guy, he started looking for this pattern elsewhere. And boom, he found it again. In Italy, about 80% of all the land was owned by just 20% of the population.
Now look, it's really important to get this. The numbers 80 and 20 aren't some kind of magic formula. It's not always exactly 80-20. Sometimes it's 70-30, maybe even 95-5. The real point, the big takeaway here, is the imbalance. The idea that a small number of things, your inputs, your efforts, are responsible for the lion's share of the results.
I love this quote because it just nails the idea. It's like, life isn't some fair 50-50 coin toss. Not every action has an equal and opposite reaction. No, some things you do have a huge, outsized impact. And the whole game, really, is figuring out what those things are.
Okay, so once this idea clicks for you, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. I'm not kidding. From huge global trends all the way down to like what's happening in your own house.
Let's take business, for example. This is like lesson 101. It's almost a law of nature that a tiny group of your customers, that vital 20%, are bringing in most of your profit. Meanwhile, the other 80% of your customers, they're only making up a tiny slice of the pie.
And it's not just about business, right? Think about your own house. The carpet in that little pathway from your couch to the kitchen, that's the 20% of your carpet that gets 80% of the foot traffic. Or go look in your closet. I'll bet you wear the same 20% of your clothes like 80% of the time. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So let's take this idea and see how it can become a totally revolutionary business strategy, one that kind of flies in the face of that old saying, more is always better.
You know, the typical way companies try to grow is just by adding stuff. More products, more features, trying to attract every kind of customer. But all that does is make things way more complex, and complexity costs a ton of money. The 80-20 way of thinking? It's the exact opposite. It says real profitable growth comes from being absolutely ruthless in focusing on the simple stuff that's already a huge success.
And this is what that looks like in the real world. You actually analyze your business and you find your A-team, that 26% of your work that's bringing in a whopping 83% of the profit. But here's the kicker. What's even more important is you find the stuff that's actively losing you money. Look at that bottom 17%. You can then make a smart decision to change it or just stop doing it.
This is just a genius example of 80-20 thinking. This company, Interface, they had this amazing insight. They realized people don't replace their whole carpet because the whole thing is worn out. No, it's just that small 20% in the hallways and high traffic spots. So what did they do? They completely changed their business model. Instead of selling big rolls of carpet, they started leasing out carpet tiles. Now they only have to replace the few that get worn out. It's so much more efficient, way less wasteful, and it was a total game changer.
Okay, so this is super cool for businesses, obviously. But the real magic, where this gets personal, is when you start applying this to your own life. And let's be honest, what's more valuable than your time?
I want you to just forget everything you know about traditional time management. You know, making longer to-do lists, trying to cram more stuff into your day. That stuff just makes us feel busy. We get a little buzz from checking things off a list, even if those things don't matter. This isn't about that. This is a time revolution. And it all starts with a simple question. What is the 20% of my time that's giving me 80% of my results? And maybe even more importantly, what's the 20% that's giving me 80% of my happiness?
So how do you do it? It's basically a 4-step process. First, think back and find your achievement islands. You know, those short bursts of time where you got a ton of great stuff done. Second, look for a pattern. What was the common thread in those moments? What were you doing? Who were you with? Third, and yeah, this is the tough one, you have to be ruthless. You have to cut, delegate, or just stop doing the other 80% of stuff that's not delivering. And finally, you take all that time you just freed up and you pour it back into that super productive 20%.
So you see, this whole 80-20 thing, it's not just a neat little productivity hack. It's a completely different way of looking at the world and your role in it.
You know, George Bernard Shaw had this great quote. It basically says that progress depends on the unreasonable person. And that's what this is all about. It's about being a little unreasonable. It's about not just accepting that you have to do everything. It's about having the guts to question that, to find the few things that really matter and then going all in on them.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. For just a little while, stop asking yourself, how can I get more done? It's the wrong question. Ask this instead. What is the 20% of my work that's creating 80% of the results? And an even bigger question. What is the 20% of my life that's bringing me 80% of my happiness? Because honestly, finding the answers to those questions, that could change absolutely everything.